Hey guys, welcome to the September Ignite Cast. Man, it is moving into the fall, but I don't know about you, Dan, but in Nashville, somebody needs to tell the weather that the fall is getting close. I actually
But it's close. It's on the way, Kevin.
it's
It's
on the
not.
way. It's on the way. I actually yesterday was or 2 days ago was driving up to visit one of our Ignite Disciple leaders, Marco Ballesteros in Lexington, and I got to spend some good FaceTime with Marco. But I was driving into Lexington thinking, oh, it might be a little bit cooler than Nashville. We're going into September. And literally, I looked down at my temperature gauge, my outside temperature gauge in my car, and it said 101 degrees. And I'm like, it is not fall yet. It is still blazing hot. So, and then yeah, coming back yesterday, coming back to Nashville, I was driving into Nashville, it's 103 degrees. So it's someone needs to tell the weather that fall is really close. So, but
Getting close, and
it's
we're
getting
going to
close.
have that retreat coming up really soon. It's going to be nice and cool in the Smokies with all the leaf colors. So
Yeah, can't
it's,
wait.
I remember it's September or September. It's November 12th and 13th, and be sure to get your registrations in really soon because we've already people starting to register. We sent stuff out, and it's going to be a great retreat. Put it on your schedule. Make sure you do that. It's going to be great.
Yeah, we're all super excited. We're 1 month away from being 1 month away. So if you think of it like that, it's just around the corner, right?
It is. It
Yeah.
is around the corner. I cannot wait for fall and the retreat. It's my favorite time of the year. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dan, get us kicked off. What are we going to talk about in September in the Ignite cast?
There's something in our brain called the reticular activating system, RAS, and it's technically it's the part of our system that expands extensive portions of the brain stem and our neurons comprising the midbrain reticular formation and the dorsolateral nuclei, all that technical stuff. What it means basically is we have a part in our brain and our brain stem that helps us sort through all the stuff that keeps coming our way. Because with this device, we keep seeing all kinds of information that just keeps us distracted, and so we have to figure out what's important and what's not important, right? So what happens is one of the best illustrations is like if you've ever been like in Manhattan and you shoot a video of someone talking. So Kevin, say hello to everybody on the Ignite Network. Kevin's going, "Hey everybody, good to see you." But I play the video back, and Kevin is staying there moving his lips, but you can't hear a word that he says. Kevin's going, but what you really hear is all the sounds in New York, the cars, jackhammers, airplane. Kevin cannot be heard because my brain heard every word that you said. My RAS zeroed in on you, but the video recorded everything that was going on around. So if we paid attention to everything that was going on, we would go crazy, Kevin. We'd just be absolutely just madmen and mad women. But our RAS allows us to zero in on what's most important. But the problem is there's things that are important that we miss. And also, there's times that we really do miss things that we think we know and we have knowledge of them, information, exposure to them, but they never come to the front because only threat and values tend to come to the front. So if they're not a high value, they're not going to be paying attention. So Jesus said, I've got to make the kingdom of God your value system for you disciples. And so he really helped us zero in on what really matters most.
Mm.
So what we did was this past month, Kevin, you put together a survey and you got some information because we wanted to see, are we doing what we say we're doing? Are we paying attention to it? Are we, is our RAS, reticular activating process in our brains filtering out things because it's either not enough of a value or it's not enough of a threat? We don't want to create a threat. How many times have you seen clickbait? It's like, they just blow everything up on social media and clickbait. We don't want to do that. But what is Jesus wanting us to pay attention to, and are we actually doing that? So, Kevin, share some of the information with us from from our survey. Thank you guys for doing it, by the way.
Yeah, it's awesome. Let me get switched over here. All right. So, two things we were trying to look at as we put this survey together that would kind of inform us on where we could help improve and the way that we equip you guys to make disciples was one, which of the principles, the key principles, we tried to pick out just the 10 key tools and 10 key principles, but which of the 10 key tools have we given you that we haven't done a good job explaining and helping you understand? So
Right.
that's part A. And then part B was how often do you use these tools? So that kind of, as Dan was mentioning, there's certain things that we get busy and we get, our margin gets really, really thin. And so which of those things are we basically filtering out and not doing versus which of those things that we just kind of don't understand how to do? So that's kind of what we were going for in this survey. And there was a really, really clear across about 8 of the questions, a clear pattern, which is what you look for in surveys, a clear pattern where, like, let me give you a good example. This is a pretty good example right here where there's a really clear understanding of how to do icons. So the bottom half of this screen shows the understanding. We ask you how well do you understand this particular tool, but on the top half you can see that the majority of people are not using the tool. So we were trying to gauge how much you understand versus how much you use. And there's again a really clear pattern throughout the tools where we saw this kind of reverse relationship between those things. But there was a couple of outliers that really was interesting. One was actually tool number 10, where everybody pretty much said we understand how to do milk versus meat, and most everyone said that we are actually using milk versus meat. So that's what we would hope to see in all 10 of these tools, right? We would hope to see both an understanding and a high usage of the tool, which actually makes us, in our language that we've been talking about for a while, disciple makers versus disciple teachers. So Dan, something like this, where you have a really high understanding, this is the Wiki Bible method, but the majority of people are not actually using the tool. We could teach this tool well, right? But are we actually using it? That would mean we're acting a little bit more like disciple teachers versus disciple makers, right?
Because to do this, you have to have a disciple, a green shoot, who's at the space where they need it. And what it says is we don't have enough green shoots that are actually engaging at this place where because if there's a demand, we'll do it, right? If there's a need, people say, help me with that Wiki Bible. Some people say, I've got a green shoot, help me with the Wiki Bible. That's great. But it'd be best if we could actually build the skill before we kind of get in a panic. And so, but it does show that we need to be having more green shoots coming through our culture.
Yeah, and it also could just say that, hey, we really value this, but if in our GWC model, for example, we really get it and we might even want it, but we haven't yet created a capacity to do it, right? And capacity in the example you just used was enough green shoots to actually practice it. But it could just be the fact that we're just using our RAS and filtering it out, right? Our brain is saying, well, I just don't have time for it. I don't have energy. I don't have resources for it. Another really, but an outlier, a negative outlier in this pattern that we looked at was in sub coaching. And so what we saw in sub coaching is that we both have a high level of lack of understanding about the tool and a high level of non-usage. So that's what we don't want to see, right? We would rather see you understand the tool and not use it because you can always create capacity as long as you understand the tool. But when we both don't understand it and don't use it, that's a concern. And that may even indicate a place where we haven't equipped you well to understand the tool. So this would be someone who, this particular graph would represent someone who probably don't get it, may not want it, and may not have the capacity to do it. It may fit all three. And so our job as coaches and equippers is to help you get it. And so this really was the only tool out of the 10 where there was a really high level where people just didn't get it. They don't understand the tool. So natural response from us is, hey, let's spend a month or maybe even 2 months. We'll see how this goes on helping our network get something that they don't currently get, which in this case is sub coaching.
Yeah. So it's a great introduction. So that's what we're talking about this month, sub coaching. So from the content that we shared with you guys last month, we went through some of the core elements of what we're doing. We said we all want to embrace the commission of Jesus, and we talked about that. In fact, in a lot of my cohorts last month, we talked about the going all in groups and how to find the disciplable people and how to actually be the disciple first. So I think it was a great month. But we actually have begun to kind of do it progressively. That's what a lot of us did last month. This month, let's look at this one. Change what you care about the developmental stage. Sub coaching is the core skill that we need here. Some of the other elements here in terms of strategies, and then this piece right here is really what is it that's really a core part of in the black. uh, it's just going to be a value that we have. And so spending more time with fewer people is a value. Oikos communities becoming a focus. In other words, if you're going to sub-coach, you need to help people learn how to do oikos, and sub-coaching does that. Spending more time with fewer people, huge principle here. We talk about that all the time. And then applying the get it, want it capacity for it, the GWC, and learning to use repentance icons, as well as being aware of not jumping the X. Those are some core elements. And so going back to the sub-coaching and charting, that's the part that we're going to be talking about right now is how do we actually do this sub-coaching and charting, and why is it such a value? Well, it's really, there's a Jesus principle built into this, isn't there, Kevin? Here's the principle that we would say that's there on your notes, and we'd say spiritual power and authority merge when small transformed communities meet in the name of Jesus. And this comes from the scripture here, because Matthew 18 and 18 verse 19, it says, if you agree, if you're symphoneo, and that's where we get the word symphony, uh, and while on earth, if you agree, and I love that idea of symphoneo. In other words, what does a symphony do? You have a conductor who keeps everybody together, use a common sheet of music. Everybody sits there and they play their part. Everybody doesn't play all at once, right? And then when it comes for your part, you do your part. It's a beautiful image of the church, isn't it, Kevin?
Hmm.
Because Jesus says you need to be a symphony. That's what my body is. My community is a symphony. Same sheet of music, same conductor, Holy Spirit. Wait for your part, use your part. And if you do this on earth, if you get this, you're going to see something really beautiful and powerful. That's what we all want. And then he says, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven, where two or three synagogues is in my name. So we get the word synagogue, where you gather, where you're together in the symphoneo. If you can do your part in the gathering, the synagogue in my name, I am with you in a powerful kind of way. And then he goes on and says, I tell you, wherever you bind on earth, this is what he said actually before he set this up, will be bound in heaven. Wherever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. You have spiritual power. That's why we said spiritual power and authority merge together when small transformed communities meet together in the name of Jesus. And I think one of the problems we try to engineer, Kevin, the ecclesia, the church of the body of Christ, in large groups and large communities. And it's very frustrating. So we have to have microphones and visual presentations and great speaking, and it's been a challenge for us. That's why the most small, reduced down size of a transformed community is really where two or three gathered together. When you find a green shoot and you add that third person, there's something powerful. Now, that's what we call an X group. But before we ever get to X group, the reason why sub-coaching is so key, Kevin, is because if you take your disciple people from your Accelerate gathering, which we talk about in module 3, and you put them together, you give them an example, an experience of what it's like to have an X group. Because if they've never experienced this this symphoneo and this synagogue, this gathering, they're going to revert back, like you said, to disciple teaching and to the things that we've used in the past that don't tend to work well. And so that's why we really think that this sub coaching is so key. And it has been, honestly, it is significant, because when you do the Accelerate gathering, even with a group of 5 or 6 or 7 people, you've seen this, Kevin, they'll do what you ask them to do, and they'll create great community. Sometimes we experience church in many ways for the first time, but then when you pull away and you do the sub coaching, they talk at a different level.
Yeah.
They When you get 2 or 3 people together, they just bear what's on their heart, where they may pull back. They're experiencing church, but they're not sure if they can fully trust that yet. And so the sub coaching empowers them to engage at this level.
Yeah, I love Dan Proverbs 25. I love that verse. We talk about it a lot when we're training coaches. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. And you just can't take the time and spend the energy with what it requires to draw out of a person their purposes in a group of more than just two or three, right? That requires a tremendous amount of focus, uniqueness, and yeah, just you have to be in much smaller groups to be able to do what Proverbs describes there. So,
Absolutely. And
mhm,
so you need both. You need the sub coaching, but you also need the gathering. And now you really have a group of 2 to 3, maybe four, and a group of maybe 5 to 8 to 12, maybe, maybe as many as 14 on occasion. These are the two groups that Jesus spent almost all of his time on.
mhm,
Crowds, he ran from them because he could not get kingdom traction in a significant way with the crowds, except to find disciplable people. And he would send his disciples out to have spiritual conversations, but he put very little of his focus on the large gathering. In fact, it was a distraction for him. So you find, and you've seen me do this before, as we talk about how Jesus did this, it's actually in the verses right there. That we gave you on the sheet. So Jesus placed his disciples in these sub-coaching groups. And so sub-coaching really creates impact. And the Jesus principle here, Kevin, is more time with fewer people. They just produce greater results. You've heard us say that so many times, but I don't know that we really believe it, right? Because the question is, how you manage your schedule determines really if you're doing this or not. Because if you are still chasing the larger groups, you probably are spending a little time with a lot of people. In fact, I think Storm has done a great job on this. We'd like to pivot right now, and Storm has what he shares is so powerful. He spends most of his time. It's really hard for you and I to schedule time with Storm because he is constantly spending more time with fewer people. And we're just seeing him in that network. He's seeing so many Gen Zs and young millennials just come to faith, become Christ followers, reproducing, starting X groups, and X groups are popping up all over that area of Pennsylvania where Storm is. So let's watch Storm's, just as he shares real briefly, just what's going on and why this is so important to him.
What difference can I tell you sub-coaching has made in our culture and our network? It has made everything different. Um, I love gathering with my leaders in groups of 3 or 4, listening to them talk. It gives them space to articulate what their needs are. And the really interesting thing is I don't always have to be the coach. They coach one another. They end up thinking so deeply about what's going on in their X groups that they self-diagnose. They can coach. There's actually occasionally a sub-coaching meeting I can't make it to, and they do it without me. Some of my more advanced leaders. It has changed everything about what we do because at the heart of our network is sub-coaching. We would not exist without sub-coaching. We couldn't possibly have achieved what we have without sub-coaching. Because you take a leader who goes through the training and reads the books and they know content, but they haven't made the paradigm shift to practice. So we have to support them and deal with what their issues are, the way they're thinking about it, because every person is unique and has a different perspective, and everyone is coming from a unique background. So how do we help this leader who is passionate and excited and wants to make disciples? How do we help them grow into this paradigm that is making disciples the way Jesus made disciples? There was only one way to do it. I don't know of any other way to do it, but it's through sub-coaching, gathering regularly every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, listening and coaching and helping them make this shift. We can't forget ever that the primary way human beings process ideas is orally, is through talking. And to sit down with me and to be able to process what's going on in their group, the problems, the places where they're stuck, the issues they're facing, and to help them work through those, to also celebrate their successes, to hurrah them, to celebrate them. There's just nothing else that we can do And if we neglect sub-coaching, if I neglect sub-coaching, I see the whole network start to dip. We're less effective. We end up losing people by attrition, because my leaders aren't as focused. I don't like to use the word accountability, although that's what it is. It's an organic space where my leaders are excited about coming to. If I forget sub coaching, they remind me, "Hey, aren't we having a sub coaching meeting?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that got canceled last time. Let's reschedule." Because they want to be there. They want to show up. They want to celebrate the victories and get help with the places they're hurting. They're stuck, so that we can grow we can grow the groups, the X groups, the going all in groups, everything we're doing to the place of great biblical discipleship. Yeah, so the Gen Zs feed on so many voices, and sub coaching helps them get to the place of a biblical worldview. And without sub coaching, they're going to take those other voices that they're listening to and use them for their guidance for their X group. And it also helps me speak into their life and say, where are you getting this from? Where's, and helping them self diagnose and self assess and think critically about the content they're taking in and how it's affecting them.
So Storm has some amazing stories, and Storm has spent time doing this core element that we find that Jesus did. And so I appreciate that network as well as maybe what you're doing as well. So Jesus says something really key here. He takes his disciples and he puts them in these sub-coaching groups. He took Peter, James, and John, and he said he led them to a high mountain where they were all alone. And there he was transfigured before them. And uh, when we were in Israel, we saw Mount Arbel, which is where a lot of people think that Jesus was transfigured. It's also where he gathered the disciples to appoint the 12. It's also where he gave the Great Commission. So this is a very familiar place. And that group, he picked this 12. But prior to that, John's gospel tells us the story of how Jesus began to really put this together. So Jesus, it says, really put together this relationship here with, first of all, he connects with Philip, and then Philip goes off and he finds his friend Bartholomew. And so those are those. So Jesus forms kind of this X group here, and then Jesus finds over here James and John, and then he finds Andrew, and Andrew goes off and gets his brother Peter. And so John's disciples, here are six of John's disciples, but Jesus is really forming, if you would, three different sub-coaching groups, which are maybe soon to be X groups. And so this process is one that you see Jesus doing. We've talked about that. We talked about that multiple times, but we've got to be finding that group. And the reason why we keep talking about this and mentioning the Jesus pattern here is because we want you guys to imitate this and begin to do this. But how are we going to get our RAS to zero in to see this as a high value? I think it's going to have to take some time to really, in our cohorts, talking about this and drilling down and saying, so if we don't subcoach, we're probably not going to see much traction in our culture. And many times you'll just kind of move on and just you'll make excuses for not really doing it. After a couple of 3 years of not subcoaching, you will quit this process if it even lasts that long.
Yeah, another place I think we can see this sub-coaching concept, Dan, is in Luke 9 and 10, which we talk about a lot, where we get the Jesus pattern from, right? Jesus
Right.
did something by sending out his disciples two different times, two different groups of people, one the 12, one the 72. And we always say if he did it twice, he set a pattern for us, right? For how to make disciples. And he did the same thing there. He paired them up into pairs and sent them out with the hopes of each of those pairs becoming an X group with a person of peace, right? Which would have been an XXY group. And so I'm sure we don't have stories of where he spent time individually with each of those pairs, but as they were kind of making their way back into town and returning to Jesus in a staggered way, one would show up maybe one day, another the next. I'm sure he was having conversations with those individual pairs that he originally set up and sub-coaching them. How did it go? Who did you encounter? Did you find a person of peace? And that's one of the most, it's one of the hardest things. And I'll just be honest, from, boots on the ground, it's one of the most difficult things I do is to try to set up sub coaching because it's another thing to do and schedules are tight and people's margins are razor thin. And so we'll even talk about that in a few minutes is how to create invisible time or how to utilize your invisible time for sub coaching. But it's
Right.
difficult. It takes probably takes more work from me to try to create sub coaching opportunities than
Right.
anything else I do. It's easy to get a group of 15 or 20 or 30 people together, but on a semi-regular basis, get those small groupings together is very, very difficult. Sometimes I'll do young mothers, um, that even I remember one sub-coaching group was a single mom and a mom of three, and we just could not figure out how to do it. We ended up on Zoom at 9 o'clock at night after the kids went to bed. Just finding that space and time. But it's generally that's how life works, is the things that are most valuable and most fruitful and productive require a little bit more effort than things that are easy, right?
Especially as a guy, it's going to be really good if you can raise up a really core female leader who really gets the accelerate principles. Have that person come into your cohort with you and start co-developing them, and so that they can partner with the women if you're a guy, or a guy with the women. So one of the things that Jesus does though is he takes his disciples into situations that are significant for them developmentally, and so he does this. Just give you an example. Um, he he really spends time helping them get this idea and this concept. So he takes his disciples into this situation where they are uh, there's this person who's dead, and so he says he would not let anyone go in with him except Peter, James, and John. So he takes them into the situation and says, guys, we need to pay attention to this. We're going to go in and so he's training them and showing them how you deal with death and how there can be a healing or a resurrection, and he's helping them see the supernatural. He's helping them debrief it. He takes them into situations. In American culture, it's really hard to operate at that level that Jesus did with his disciples, where you take them into all those situations. But it says another time he took Peter, James, and John along with him. He says, "Sit here while I go over here and pray." And of course, we know in the Garden of Gethsemane what happens there. But he takes them along with him so they can experience this. Now, he starts off with the group that I showed you, where you've got really three different groups, and then he selects Peter, James, and John of those three. So that was actually a sub-coaching group that forms out of the larger group of 12, even out of the larger group of maybe 100 disciples. And that's the group he's going to spend more time with. He spends more time with Peter, James, and John. You don't hear of too many other sub-coaching experiences on the level of Peter, James, and John. And so, because he's developing and training them. And so I don't know that you can spend time with even all 12 evenly. And that's where we try to go, well, we need to spend time with every single person. But who is in your culture that you really need to drill down with? Maybe those two or three moms you can't really do a whole lot with. And maybe you need to raise up the female, and maybe that's one of the people you need to raise up so they can start spending that maybe with those moms. And so that does put pressure on us, but we have to step into this so we can get to the next place. And that's where we really raise up the network leaders. And so spending time with key disciplable people is really important. So Jesus created this transformed community that he wanted them really to reproduce. That's what he's doing. He's giving them an example of this. But yeah, we do need to talk about some of the practical elements of it. The invisible time is really a key piece, and being intentional of your sub coaching. I think for me, that's what it took whenever I really first started this. I had to really be intentional and really get this into a discipline for me.
Hmm. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about maybe start on invisible time. This was a huge principle for me on trying to figure out how to, fit subculturing into my natural rhythms of life. And that's one thing I've had to learn because we all have very tight margins. We're all very busy. Most of us in our network are co-vocational. So it's hard to fit in a whole new element of, a whole new tool that requires this much time. And so one of the really key valuable tools that I've learned from you, Dan, over the years is how to utilize your invisible time. So talk to us about what is invisible time? What do you mean when you say that?
Well, obviously, invisible time is time that doesn't take away from family because what we really encourage you in the book, You're Made for This, is when you get together with in that after work, after the sun sets down, in that after in the evening time, really try to be with your family and as much as you can with the people around you and how you do life. Until that time happens, invisible time is time that before work, at lunch, immediately after work, those three pieces are invisible time, and those three pieces really give you the ability to not step into that family time zone. So, I've, especially when I was in a pastorate, I would do a lot of meetings before people went to work, and I would try to do my sub coaching where I would try to see, okay, where are they working? And I would drive to them because I had more flexibility in my schedule. But by putting people together at lunchtime and then right after work, can we meet at 4:30? Can we meet at 5? We're only talking 45 minutes, but I need to try to carve out that time. And they would give that to me. That they didn't take away from their family time. And so that invisible time really allows and empowers a whole other level of capacity. So you're not taking away from their core discipling time. We really want it to be in their family and with their oikos. And this violates that a touch, but you're trying to build oikos with them and develop them. So Kevin, I think it's really key is this right here. Just be intentional because it takes effort to subcoach, right? And
Mm.
so Jesus uh will really he has to abide in you before you can really get this piece going. And then you need to make an emotional space for Jesus and your disciples. And that takes some real disciplines. And then don't program this. Learn the rhythms of Jesus, which obviously is easier said than done, right? But Peter, James, and John were Jesus's top performers. And so don't forget this, is that if we can raise up a new group of leaders, then it expands our capacity. So Jesus could be crucified and resurrected, and the gospel goes on because he raises up primarily, three core guys, Peter, James, and John. The other nine were still significant, but not at the same level. And then I really would encourage you early in your very first semester that you would then uh, build this culture, prayerfully create an X group size communities for your leaders based on their GWC, their get it, want it capacity for it, preferably the same sex group. Sometimes you may have to step in and raise up a group of women until a female leader can step in that you're going to heavily subcoach. And maybe that female becomes a part of your Peter, James, and John inner circle. Or maybe if you're a female, it's the guy. But however you do that, you've got to find ways to really expand yourself. So trying to schedule this during invisible time is so key. And these can be fairly short meetings because you will get a lot of traction during these times. So it feels like another thing to do, another program to do. This is not a program. These are learning the rhythms of Jesus, and Jesus wasn't a program, but it takes some intentionality, and you have to pass the RAS, the reticular activating system. It wants to go, I want to spend less time with a lot more people because need to get more going, and that's at the core of something that's going to undermine our culture in every way.
Mm. Yeah. So Dan, for the month of September, when we meet with our coaching cohorts, what are some things, and maybe I can throw out a couple things. One of the things that we would want to see is next time we send this survey out, is we want to have a much higher understanding and a much higher usage of the sub coaching tool, right? So we want to encourage you to encourage one another and to help one another uh, come up with some strategies and some action points on how you can actually start implementing sub coaching into your cultures. So we want to see not just our understanding of sub coaching surface and rise, but also our usage of sub coaching. That's one thing I would hope we would see from our September cohorts. What do you think, Dan? What are some other things we would want to see?
Absolutely. And just to remind you that on the survey and also on the 10 principles, as tools and strategies, there's really four things we do. And of those four, every one of them actually try to drive the same behavior. Your accelerate gathering is designed to really move people into sub coaching and then move people into having a going all in discussion, which will then move people into an X group. It all ripples. It's not four separate things. I think that it's easy for us to programmatically see that I've got four things I've got to do. These are all integrated doing the same thing. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this culture moving so that we, in kind of all the rhythms of what we do, this becomes just built into the whole process.
Mm.
And so as you go principle, right? I think the as you go principle is so key, and it's so hard to build it in because this as you go principle is, obviously with invisible coaching, this talks about the invisible time, but really this piece that we showed you last time that we didn't get too much traffic on traction on is that really we want you to embrace the commission of Jesus. And this is what we just were talking about. It's how do you do it going all in? Well, prayerfully identify someone emerging as a green shoot. And then how do I get a group of people to really change what we care about? Well, the wiki process really allows disciples to raise questions that can be exploring. And then this piece of sub coaching and maturity icons, it really helps establish the spiritual foundations necessary to advance a maturing disciple of Jesus. And so it's sub coaching really helps people move into that process. And then of course there's tools then for how you actually intensify multiplication and launch an X group. But these four pieces, we're really drilling down on this one today, because if you can get your core leaders to get some experience of what it would be like to be in a transformed community, and those transformed communities become so powerful that they change your life. I was talking to a disciple from California that we worked with, that we started working with 35 years ago. And it was a husband and wife, and they both were weeping on the call saying, this has changed our lives. Our lives have never been the same. It's changed our kids. Our kids do this naturally. We never sat down and had a lesson with them. They just do it. And they just were weeping, saying, 35 years later, this is the most important thing of following Jesus is this transformed community. And their transformed communities have been multiplying and growing. And they still get together with that original core group. And they said, we just can't let that group go. It's so meaningful to us. It's given us lifelong friends. We never had lifelong friends until we started doing this. And
Mm.
that's what we want for you guys is not one more thing to do, not one more program. Your RAS will shut that out. It's like, oh, I can't do this. We want you to raise and elevate this value. And I mean, think about it. When Jesus went to the cross, he had Peter, James, and John in the garden. He he cared for them. He gave John his mom. He went after Peter in the resurrected form. He spent time with those three in the resurrected form. I mean, if you had just, you know, 50 days, Pentecost, to between crucifixion and resurrection, to do everything, to wrap things up, he spent his time with Peter, James, and John, and gathering them together, and they were permanently changed by this. And I guess that's what I want for you guys, is that you'll have people in your life, not just tasks, not just appointments and assignments, but people that will permanently change you and you'll change them. And through this, the kingdom of God will move forward. I guess I get emotional because I've seen it work. And I want that for you, for all of us, for at the end of our life to be able to say, we really did this, and it was so worth it. And it could have been a program, but it wasn't. And that's what I want for you. And you'll walk that and walk through this with people, and they will help change the culture, and you'll build this network together. That's what I want.
That's good. Another thing I was thinking would be really great for our groups, our cohorts to do is share some stories about sub coaching victories, sub coaching challenges. But what do you do? What are some things you talk about at sub coaching? How do you navigate a sub coaching meeting? Things like that. One of the things that we kind of tagged onto this sub coaching tool in the survey was basically prayer mapping or disciple mapping, right? So that's one thing I love to do in sub coaching groups is make sure that they're clear on who the Lord has called them to pursue and who to make disciples with. And so just walking them through prayer mapping, disciple mapping, and then following up on that each time you meet with them. If you do mapping, you'll have their map that you'll kind of pray through with them and for them, and then follow up. How's John? John, someone you put on your prayer map last month. How's John doing this month? Have you followed up? Have you had a spiritual conversation with John? So just share as a group, as a small community, as a cohort, share stories about how you navigate. Maybe we'll talk more about that next month. How do you navigate a sub coaching meeting? What kind of things do you talk about? How do you pray for your disciples, your disciple makers? So that'd be probably another good thing for you to do in the cohort setting this month. So yeah, just have a conversation around sub coaching, and your cohort coaches will lead you through that, navigate that with you, and just engage and encourage one another, and just sharing community around how you utilize and navigate sub coaching. And if you're not sub coaching, this is what I would say: start with one sub coaching group, right? If it's new, don't. If you have a network in front of you and you've never sub coached before, just pick out your two most fruitful disciple makers and start a sub coaching group with them. And I think that would be your starting point. So,
Peter, James, and John's, and they may not be the first group that formed, but you'll find them, and yeah, because it's so valuable, and you'll see so much traction. Again, it's the principle. We've said it 5 times in this already. More time with fewer people is gonna get you down the road,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So,
Yeah. And that's so counterintuitive to our American church culture. So awesome. So don't forget, we've mentioned it already, but our annual retreat, which if there's one thing that face to face that we would love for you to come to, it would be that annual retreat that we do every November. And you can find information on our website, ignitedisciplemaking.com. In the main menu at the top of the screen, or I think might be on the side if you're using a mobile app, but ignitedisciplemaking.com, not the app, but our actual website. In the menu, there is a fall retreat link there, and that'll take you to the Eventbrite page where you can sign up. We've tried to simplify the options this year so that you don't have to think, do I need a private room, a public room? We tried to simplify it down into a couple of options. We're going to do the best we can possibly to do to get everyone in the lodge. But when when we run out of lodge rooms, we are going to use some of the cabins. So make sure you get on quickly to assure that you can get a lodge room if you want a lodge room. And if you want to bring a group, feel free to reach out to us. We'll figure out how to best make a group happen for you. If you have a bunch of people you want to bring, we'll help you figure that out. But ignitedisciplemaking.com, and in the menu, fall retreat will take you to find out everything that you need to know about what we're doing in November.
everybody on this call gets a discount because you're a part of Ignite as a participating, supporting financial member. So we want to give you the code, and so just click on there for the code, and it'll reduce it down to $99 for you per person, and that will help you a lot. If you want a private room, it'll be a little bit more,
Yeah.
but that'll you can get in the lodge with a great room for $99. Make sure you do that and
Yeah. And
include the.
one thing we tried to do as well this year is you can stay a second night if it works for your flights and it makes sense to you, but we pulled it back to one night, one overnight again, to simplify and try to make it more efficient and more cost effective for you. So it's only designed around a one night stay this year instead of a 2 night stay. But we also have the availability to give you the second night if you need it, if you're flying into town, or you have a long drive and you want to rest before you leave. So only the program's built around a 1 night stay, and all that's laid out for you on the Eventbrite page.
Summer schedule is last year where we start right at noon, and we'll have all day Tuesday from noon on, and then all day Wednesday until that evening. And people within a couple hours tend to want to drive back home, or some people who've driven, they want to get started on their journey, so they want to get a couple hours into their journey from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And but if you're flying with flights, be sure to register for the extra night there at the lodge. It'd be a great time. Bunch of us will still be there, and we'll see you guys that next morning. So be
Yeah.
sure to retreat scheduled on your schedule and book it soon.
Yep, and Rachel's our coordinator for our event again this year, so she's always easy to work with. So if you have any questions, reach out to her. And we're looking forward to it. We'll see you actually before then. We'll have an Ignite cast in October. But until then, we are praying for you that the face of the Lord would shine upon you and that you would see much fruit in your disciple making efforts. So see you next month on the Ignite cast.